So, as I alluded to last video, we've got more delicious Tory panic for you today of the most savoury kind. But first, before we do go diving into that, I'm going to explain to you what the two sort of schools of conservative thought are on dealing with Reform UK. And the anti-Reform UK people basically are, we are the Tory party. We do not read Reform. If we get taken over by Reform or we do a deal, we are going to go even further right. And those people are what you would call the conservative moderates, the very people that the party has demonized, called wets, probably also been throughout their most recent political history in government, probably their most competent like ministers, leaders, recitationists, public speakers. But no, they've been pushed out of the party. We ain't listening to you, but they are still the biggest core block of the Tory party. And these people who want to go even further right forget that there are those people there, those moderates that they need, in order to win. And you look at the last election, who did the Tories lose most of? It was centre-right voters and even centrist voters who would mainly used to sort of lean towards, the Tories. They went off to the Lib Dems. Those voters that went to Reform, they ain't coming back. There's another article that we're going to go over maybe later about how these voters, those Reform voters, they ain't coming back. Like most time, the Conservatives lose someone to Reform, they ain't coming back. And last video we talked about how Kimmy Badenoch's probably, her political leadership already is on the rocks almost immediately. But instead of looking at what the centrist view of this, instead today, we are going to have a look at the other side of this argument. We are going to have a look at someone who is making the argument that, no, the Tories need to do a deal with Reform. And not just they need to do a deal with Reform. It is urgent that they do a deal with Reform. So, like I say, delicious Tory panic of every kind. And it is delicious. But before we do go getting into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. Down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, there's the Pony Club down below as well, and of course, you can click on the like and share button as well. That all helps. And if you are new, hit the subscribe button. And let's crack on into today's story. So this bizarrely comes from, again, on Conservative Home, but the guy who wrote this, Andy Preston, he was the independent mayor of Middlesbrough. So he had no political affiliation between 2019 and 2023. But now he is insisting, writing an article for Conservative Home, you need to do a deal with Reform. And this is the other side of that argument that we're talking about now today, because it would not surprise me if you see these two fights about what Kimmy Badenoch needs to do with Reform, because this guy's got an idea of what he has to do or what she has to do, and that is, of course, do a deal with Reform. However, remember, there's that entire other school of Tory thought that is like against this 100%. And if this deal happens, I think you would see a massive Tory split, like a massive Tory split. I think you would see a huge part of the party just walk away from it. But if that happens, don't worry, we'll be covering that. We will be covering that. Don't you worry. So let's get on into this. So, if the Conservative Party think that Reform UK's stunning election performance was like a bad dream, then they should get ready for a nightmare. The MP for Clacton is now so close with the world's most powerful man that he received a very public endorsement from him, massively boosting his credibility and stoking global media interest, making reform even more popular. Don't think so. People in the UK do not like Donald Trump. They didn't like him during his last term in office. They certainly ain't gonna like him now. It's only like dyed in the wool reform voters who like salivate over Trump just as much as the MAGA movement does. Uh, you know, he ain't gonna do that. But back to this. So Reform are already polling at least at 19%, and it's easy to imagine them winning at least 20 to 25% of the votes at the next general election, with most of these coming from disaffected Tories. Again, he's not wrong. He's not wrong. But where, of course, are those other votes going to go? Remember what we've said every single time we've covered this Tory panic. No mention of the Liberal Democrats. Once again, that yellow stalking tiger stalking them down the streets. So you're gonna, yeah, they just ignore the Liberal Democrats completely. But hey, the more they do that, as we said last time, the more Ed Davey has the advantage to just absolutely come and steal their lunch. So this is, of course, now a highly feasible outcome that would be disastrous for the Conservatives because it makes it almost impossible for them to get into the general election votes that they need to form a government. So this again is talking about this new reality that the right-wing vote has now been split, and that if the Conservatives ever want to get into power, ever again, they might have to go into coalition with Reform. Would Nigel Farage do that? I probably would. However, everything that went wrong, everything bad that happened, he'd blame it on the Conservatives. It wouldn't be his party's fault. You know, this would be what we saw during the coalition years, the previous coalition with the Tory Lib Dems, where the Lib Dems were blamed for every single failure of the Tory government, and they let them do it. They let them get away with it. And that was something that I think the Lib Dems have learned a very, very big lesson of. But something they still do suffer with today from that coalition. And they maybe have now turned a corner on that, maybe at last, certainly. But they've still got a lot to prove. And like I say, the next couple of years are going to be their time to really prove it. So, what does he want Kimmy Badenoch to do? So, she's done everything right so far. Okay. I've offered constructive criticism of her of course, in the past, but her leadership campaign impressed me by standing firm and refusing to commit to specific policies. Really? You were impressed so much by her that the fact that she said nothing about policy just went, wow, there's a leader who will do absolutely nothing. Just what? Anyway, he continues, riskily, but of course rightly. She decided that the Tories must now first agree on who they are and what they all believe in. And only from that point can now sensible policies be formed. So, what if people don't agree, or the Tories don't agree with that direction of travel she wants to go in? What then? Will these be sensible policies? I've already talked about before plenty in the past. The second she starts to talk about policy, like this is the policy we are going to do, oh boy, once again, out will come the infighting for the Conservatives. Just as night follows day, that will happen. And the second she starts to like nail down policy, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to believe in. This is what we're going to do if we get in government. There will be no harmony in the Tory party. So Assuming, of course, she achieves Tory harmony, which, again, she won't, Kemi must then do two very tricky things. Initially, of course, stopping her party from moving too far to the right. Mimicking reform is, of course, a mug's game because they cannot out Farage Nigel Farage. Again, very true. Then there's the more difficult bit. Creating some kind of mutually beneficial agreement with reform. Yeah, that ain't gonna happen. If they want to go into coalition with reform, bad things will happen to them. Very, very bad things indeed. And you think Nigel Farage is going to stay quiet and not blame the Tories, just as he did for Brexit? Like, oh, if only they did things my way, Brexit would be perfect and fine and wonderful. If only they did the budget my way, we wouldn't have this economic catastrophe, Nigel says. Anyway, back to this. So the mere thought of that sends shudders down many Tory spines, but it's got to be done. Why go to the reform? Like I say, why go instantly to reform? There are other parties, the Tories maybe could go back to. Maybe they could try going back to the Lib Dems. I doubt the Lib Dems would do it. But there are other parties maybe they could go into coalition with. So, without, of course, working with reform, there is now almost no hope thanks to Trump's win. What's Trump's win got to do with voting in the UK? Anyway, all parts now of the media obsesses about a deal, of course, between them. They can see that there is a quote, a right of center deal that could be a game changer for both sides. And a hallmark of a great deal is where both sides benefit. Except it's not. It's not. Because you are assuming that the Tory party is one unified body. But if anything, the past couple of years have really shown it is not. The only reason that there isn't any uprisings, angers, briefings against anyone or anything like that is because Kimmy Badenoch has yet to come out and say, this is what we are going to do. This is like Tory policy. This is what we're going to do if we get back into government. That is when things will start to fall apart. Those factions have not gone away. They are still there. They are now just giving her breathing room and certainly trying to court her on what she wants to do. And remember, just as Boris Johnson did, Kimmy Badenoch has filled her cabinet full of her own yes men. Gee, that won't cause a problem in the future, will it? So, working together would categorically now lead to electoral dominance for the political right. The averages of the last 5 opinion polls show that Tory support is at 26% and, of course, Reform at 19%. That is 45% between them. In modern Britain, 45% of the popular vote for a single party almost guarantees a strong majority. Even better, support could then drift up to 30% and even 20% for the pair, and one poll this month has already placed them now at 29 and 19%. So what they are essentially trying to propose is, or what this guy's trying to propose, is a permanent electoral pact that what the Tories can do, maybe they could be the light, fluffy version of the Conservatives, while Reform are the right-wing nut jobs. But don't worry, they can go into coalition with each other and balance each other out. Gee, how many times throughout history and even recent political history have we seen that idea floated and it just absolutely crash and burn within the first couple of months of them being in government? I'm pretty sure people in the comments can put plenty of examples of governments where that has happened. So, working together, they would only need to take oh, hang on. Here we are. Yep. So working together, they would only need to take place in a minority of currently unheld seats. Say the best 250 where the Conservatives or Reform are second. Quick data and runs of analysis do show that over 200 of these could be won very comfortably if one or the other steps away, giving them both now a huge boost in seats and now severely hurting Labour. Again, he's making the tactical voting argument. Again, that's if tactical voting works out, if this deal works out. And what might other parties then do if they see Reform and Conservatives doing this? Does he think that other parties might not then start to think differently as well? Maybe another coalition forms of maybe like the Lib Dems, Labour, I don't know, SNP Greens that just say, oh, well, we've seen you do this. Yeah, we're not going to allow you to do it. We're going to go into coalition against you. Just, who knows? Who knows on that front? But it could be interesting because if they don't think that they can just get away with this and have like absolutely zero repercussions, yeah, they need to think again. Also, why, let's say, would a centrist Tory who's been told, okay, you need to vote Reform in this seat, suddenly then go vote for Reform when last time they went and voted for the Lib Dems? Because again, data also shows those Tories who went over to the Lib Dems, they ain't returning anytime soon either. So, the Tories could return as many as 300 MPs and Reform's presence could grow to 60. These incredible results from today's levels, and of course, would then put them both into government. Again, how well would they govern together in government? I don't think they would. Things could go, of course, even better. If Labour does continue to misfire and mismanage, the Tories could win a majority and Reform gain over at least 70 seats. But this is a very tall order, and I stress again that it would now depend on them coming in some kind of electoral deal. Without a deal, even the astonishing leadership by Badenoch and a Labour shocker would now see the Tory support maxed out at least 35%. Our voting system, of course, makes it impossible for the likes of Reform to win power that they deserve. That they deserve? Very, very interesting way to put that. But if they stay strong, they will now, of course, likely with Trump's blessing, they will now commit the Tories now to increasing irrelevance. Badenoch and Farage have stated that they will not enter into a deal with the other. Ignore this. They have to say this at this point in the election cycle. There is no doubt that both are very clever enough to know that a deal is the only way for each of them now to achieve their goals. And their goals are very different. And again, what do all the conservative moderates do? Because they hate Farage, they hate the direction that the party is going in. They signal that very loudly over the past couple of years, even before the recent general election. Those that have gone to Reform, they ain't coming back. They ain't going to vote for, the Tories again. Those that have gone to the Lib Dems, far more than have gone to Reform, they ain't coming back either. Doesn't say a thing about the Lib Dems, which again, I think shows just how little they regard the Lib Dems as a threat. But they really should do. They really should do. And there are a couple of people in a couple of articles we have read where they do acknowledge somewhat ever briefly that the Lib Dems are a threat. But they almost don't want to openly acknowledge that they are such a threat, which is, again, interesting on that front. So let's finish this off and then get into the comments of this. So, an alliance, of course, may be unpalatable to many, but it is the safest way to stop the weak-kneed Conservatives from defecting to Reform. It is the only way to save the whole of Britain's right of centre now from irrelevance. And here's the thing, the right of centre are the ones who do not want this deal. They do not want to do a deal with Farage. They have said it multiple times. It is the conservative centrists that ain't interested in doing a deal with Farage. They do not want to go in this right-wing direction of travel. So we'll see what happens, but doing a deal like this with Farage, unlikely. But let's see what we've got to do in the comments, because I'm sure the comments of this are going to be pretty good as well. So this guy called Sean says, I have been very critical of reform, not because I disagree with them. I don't. I actually agree with everything I hear, with the exception of their crangy and dangerous proportional representation ideas, but that is another story. I am critical because reform don't actually care what damage is done to the country under Labour. Their single ambition in life is to now utterly destroy the Conservatives, because that is their route to becoming the major right-centre party. Again, they won't be a right-centre party. Nigel Farage will not let that happen. And of course, if Labour are kept in power for another 20 years, if Labour are allowed to create a left-wing superstate that can never ever pull back from, if Labour want to take us back into the EU, it is, of course, no concern to the leaders of Reform UK whatsoever. They will deal with Labour later. The damage that they do to Britain in the meantime is almost irrelevant to them. Having said that, we live in a country where today people are now desperately want to get rid of this Labour government after just 5 months in power. I'm sure he's referring to the that petition, but again, we don't run governments on petitions. And again, that's something that Kimmy Badnock said. Yeah, we see, of course, in local governments and by-elections every week where reform stands against us, Labour and Lib Dems are now laughing all the way to the council chamber. Again, he's not wrong in that. A lot of the local by-elections that we've seen where reform have stood, the right-wing vote has been split, and guess what? Labour, Lib Dem, victory. Like I say, the fact that they aren't talking about the Lib Dems just shows you how really poor they are at recognising the threat the Lib Dems are to them. And of course, it is true in Parliament. If you vote Reform, you get Lib/Labour, and they will remain that way now for the foreseeable future. There are, of course, two possible solutions. People may dislike the comment, but it will not change that fact that one, Reform has to wind down and join the Tories, an established right-wing party that already wins elections, instead of acting now as a spoiler candidate in every election. Good luck for getting Reform to do that. Two, Reform and the Tories have got to do some sort of electoral pact, so we do not maximise damage to the other and let the Labour now back in. Again, very unlikely to happen. And of course, what do the centrist Tories think when they see that pact happen? They ain't going to get involved with that pact. So we can, of course, do something very, very simple by getting together and trying to divide up each constituency based on who has the best chance of winning, perhaps who came second at the last election. Farage, Trice, and other reform leaders' massive ego will not let them accept this option, at least accept option one. So it has got to be option two, simple as. But again, that ain't going to happen. And until we accept the fact and do something about it, we are going to keep losing on the right. And next year's local elections will be a very interesting case point to now prove it. Nobody wants Labour. Again, disagree with that. But thanks to Reform, we are now going to see many Labour Lib gains easily next year, especially since 2021, the last time these seats were now up, was actually a very good year for us. So I hope we are all ready for that. And that is something worth talking about, actually. The last time these seats were up, this was the vaccine bounce year. And everyone was expecting the Tories to do really, really bad in these local elections. But because of the vaccine bounce, because of all the stuff going on, they actually did quite well. And that was the last election they did quite well in. That 2021 local election. Well, now all those seats are going to come up. And once again, that is going to be a big, big test for Kimmy Badnock. It's going to certainly see what the political landscape might look like. We don't know. But it's going to be an interesting local election. I will tell you that now. Let's see. And we had yeah. Here's someone says the lessons to redress. Through rather the high-mindedness of David Cameron now flirting with the Lib Dems, it became the party of some and some. And some, of course, happening with UKIP now putting up paper candidates just to get votes to now tantalise. Some of you could vote, and then certainly for not others. It would simply fit your purpose just to be in that in that MP position, and when it's spoiled, the image of the party, and where they are now, nowhere. You see a party on one hand being very high-minded, thinking that they can just ride over the public, and the other now taking the tantalizing line of both ending now in derision. How you get back on track? Completely redress, reject unsafe laws, stand up for civil liberties, and get back to a better, stable society. The public have the final vote. Again, he's pointing out the right facts. They are there just to be a populist party, just to be spoilers. They know that they will destroy the Conservative Party for as more they want to be there. Someone else points out, again, quite rightly, Farage wants to destroy the Conservative Party, so any deal would be completely counterproductive. He would agitate and disrupt in his usual manner, turning the whole thing into a fiasco. No Tory now needs to plough their own furrow. They have now plenty of time to do that, thanks to Reform giving Labour a landslide. Again, blaming Reform for the Labour landslide, no, that's your own party's doing there on that. Yeah, why would Reform make a deal with socialist Tories? Um, yeah, someone pointing out what I said. Yeah, our voting system makes it impossible for likes of Reform to win the power that they deserve. Uh, these are the key words, and I wouldn't just confine just desserts to Reform, but to the UK's electorate. We all deserve the democratic right to vote for a party that represents our ideals, and which now has a realistic chance of proportional representation in Parliament. Reform, which I do not support, just received 14% of the vote for just under 1% of the seats in Parliament. It's a kick in the teeth for democracy. Reform UK's stunning election performance. This is the estate agent's use of the word stunning. Reform did well against the fearsome barrier of first past the post, but let's not exaggerate. Then, Badenoch impressed by refusing to commit to specific policies. You mean just like Cameron did in 2010? Fantastic. Just what we want. Politicians too vague, timid, or even duplicitous to actually say what they're going to do and mean it. She decided that the Tories must first agree on who they are and what they believe in. I look forward to that, or to hell just freezing over, whichever comes first. Um, Again, very good. And then again, someone else pointing out here um, about the whole electoral strategy, saying it's far too simplistic. You cannot assume that the position of a conservative reform alliance would even appeal to either to all reform voters or to all conservative voters. There are some reform voters who want to see Farage embrace Tommy Robinson, and they aren't going to embrace Kimmy Badenoch as now right-wing enough. Many conservatives just don't like Farage's rhetoric on immigration, which borders about being anti-immigrant at times. If the alliance goes hard, you will lose the Conservatives. If it swings towards the Conservatives, you will then lose hardline reform supporters. Again, exactly right on that. What I said there as well, commenting on that as well. Are there any good ones left? Yet someone else. Yes, has been very debated at length under Daniel Hand's article. First off, people do not think reform would, of course, be interested, and Farage seems much more interested in, of course, replacing the Conservatives. Kemi is also not interested and has a very poor relationship with Farage. We also had reform voters saying that they would not vote Conservatives even if there was a reform, even if there wasn't a reform candidate, and we discussed the YouGov polling actually confirming that. Then, of course, many Conservatives on this site said they will not vote for reform, even if there wasn't a Conservative candidate. Again, polling backs it up. So it all seems very difficult. Um, yeah, so this is actually an interesting comment thread. So someone says, I agree with nearly all of this, but the article appears to now belie the headline. Preston is, of course, arguing that there are several things that Badenoch needs to do with the Tories prior to, of course, seeking an arrangement with reform. Those things cannot happen overnight. And I suggest that all the more necessary would have been the more appropriate phrasing than all more urgent. The one thing we really ought to do, I've learnt from Liz Truss, is that there is no not a second to lose mentality that can now easily now lead to avoidable mistakes, sometimes some very big ones. To which someone else then replies to that saying, I suggest that the things that the Conservative Party might need to do to become attractive, but to become more attractive to reform, of course, are not achievable. The most obvious reason is that the past cannot be undone. And that was the thrashing now through of Brexit and other conservative ideas after 2019. That has made the Conservative Party now a completely poisonous vehicle as it is. It would rather like being taken over by Gargle or Alpine. Secondly, if this was just about now changing current and, of course, future policies of the majority of parliamentary party, well, of course, would not stand for it. They simply do not believe this in the same things that reform is pushing. I used to think that members might actually support such changes, but as the numbers now fall away, I suspect that those remaining are now remainers or rejoiners, high tax, high immigration people. They would not want reform as much as reform doesn't want them. And of course, I understand Reform has another big announcement next week. Everyone thinks, by the way, it might be Suella Braverman is defecting. Uh, yes, here we are. The likelihood of a deal with Reform is, of course, dependent on trying to neutralize the one nation. Again, the Conservatives forget. They forget about these one nation group of Tories. Core, central to their votes. Most of their power, most of their MPs come from that sort of block. And yet they just hate these people, forget about them, and think that they'll go with them on any joyride they might want to go on. Turns out, doesn't happen that way. So back to this. So they need to, of course, neutralize the One Nation caucus in the party. And for the life of me, I cannot see how that will actually be achieved inside of two general elections. As things stand, the Conservatives are now left of centre dominated and a complete anathema to now traditional Tories. To say at least 40 or 50 years ago, whose mindset now reform represents. I don't think there's too many more. Oh, hang on. No, there's no more good ones. But yeah, you can see the thinking from now this pro Farage side in the Tory party that wants to do a deal. That they can't merge with them, so they know the merger is going to be impossible. But an electoral pact, well, maybe that's the idea. But as someone rightly pointed out, there are reform people who would never vote Conservative, even if there was no reform candidate. They would never vote Conservative, and vice wise for no, sorry, likewise, not vice wise, and likewise, of course, for Conservatives wouldn't vote for a reform candidate, even there being no Conservative candidate. So if there is an electoral pact where there was standing down in each of these constituencies, why would they go for this? So it is a big problem. It is a massive problem because the right-wing vote has now really been split. These upcoming local elections that we're going to have in May, they're going to be very, very significant because, like I say, that was the last big Tory win. 2021, last big Tory win, because that was the vaccine boost. And now, who knows what will happen in that local election, but it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be very interesting. I will admit, it'll be very interesting to see what's going to happen. But those local elections could be all to play for. Certainly very true. But I do want to have someone on to sort of help discuss that, because I think that would be kind of good to get them on to talk about that. So maybe we'll sort of reach out to them again. We had them on before, Josh from Movement Forward. So we'll have him on again, maybe talk about that, maybe close to the time. But as always, like I say, thank you very much for watching. It's been a long one today, I know that. But as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.